This might actually help a little bit with that topic. Because part of the reason is that, the data community for a long time, since before Wilkinson, FAIR is nothing new, it's just, it was popularization of good practice. We've been saying sort of do these things, but part of the reason is, okay, but why? Like who cares, who's listening, right, at a global scale? And partially that's what we're going to try to cover here in this presentation, where I'll be presenting what's going on over at IODE, IOC UNESCO, and the ODIS system now, the Ocean and Data Information System. The Ocean Data and Information System that's coordinated by IODE, but is the sum of many, many organizations connecting and federating their data. This is a presentation on behalf of many others. ODIS is a federation of people that Ecotino, others are all connected to the system. So it's not my work as such, but I do the architecture and strategic development for ODIS to function. My time has been supported primarily by European projects, some of them you see over there. Trying to solve this issue regionally, but also realize that we have to solve it globally at the same time if we want longevity. I always like to start with first principles, just so like we're on the same page, and the previous presentations set the groundwork wonderfully for what's going on. Going back, so Adam took us back to the 80s. I'll go back a little bit more. And this is not a question to answer right now, but just think about it. What was the internet when it started, and how is it different from the web? We take it so much for granted, we often don't tell the difference between those two things. Back in the day, DARPA funded the early versions of the internet, but a few universities were connecting their computers. We already had local area networks, the exciting idea that you could plug in your Commodore 64 to another Commodore 64, and then basically they talked to each other with a wire and said, why don't we just do this at a bigger scale across universities? And DARPA funded that as the early forms of the internet, a set of protocols and technologies to connect machines. It grew, as we know, and it's grown exponentially, where we have a huge interconnected network of machines. But the internet is quite low down in terms of close to the machines, right? So we have computers, networks, the internet is there. And then came along the World Wide Web, which was trying to make the internet more accessible and friendly to people like us who are not necessarily deep tech folks, right? You want to click on a web page or something, and then you go to the web. And then on top of the web, we started building things like browsers and search engines and then other content that has now destroyed Generation Z. So again, the World Wide Web, right? What is it? It's trying to make things a bit more user-friendly and trying to set certain rules. This is the A in FAIR, access protocols, right? Of how to talk between things. But then what's happened? Over time, the internet, this is from Halcyon Maps. This is a map of the internet. You can't really, unfortunately, see it, but you have Google over there, the large continent of Google. You have continent of YouTube, which they acquired, and other little islands of the internet. Because, of course, when you start connecting machines and connecting web experiences, you tend to connect to your friends, things that you like, right? And then this starts to create little islands and continents and real borders in the internet. So when we move down into things like the social media sphere, the Reddits of the world, the Weibos of the world, LinkedIn's, they like to capture you within their own system. It's a business model, right? Of course, they link out to things that make them money or otherwise reward them. Same thing is true of news networks. As we see the impact on democracy, the impacts on our societies, the impacts on our own families and our own brains. That is how information flows. The internet is there as an underlying neutral layer, but we build things on top of it that have borders, that have directions, that have alliances, etc. And it keeps going. Something happened then where back in the day, AOL, I was very happy to see that Lycos, AOL, and Ask Jeeves are still around in various forms, but of course Google and its page and rank algorithm took over because what they were able to do is saying, back in the day, I used to know which web pages I wanted to go to, right? You just don't know that. It's like the stuff, your web life was pretty restricted. There weren't so many quality web pages out there. But now there are so many that when the search engine business came up, they said, hey, if we organize that data and metadata and help people find things when they don't know what they're looking for, we change the world. And indeed, that's what happened. Most of the time when you're looking for something on the web, you don't know where you're going to go. The same is true for the scientific web, for the ocean, not just scientific, ocean operations, ocean business. You don't know which scientist, you don't know their email address has the right data for you at this time. We need to build something at an application layer, like a search engine layer, that can start to connect it. But the ocean's not doing too well in that. The ocean is scattered around all of those little continents and islands and things that we saw there. The ocean doesn't have its own sort of internet, so to speak. So some time ago, a few years ago, Vladimir Ryabin former executive secretary of IOC, he asked me, could I write a state of the ocean data report for the IOC? And I said I could, but it would be, of course, biased. I have networks, I have global networks, but I'm just one human. They have networks, but it will be a biased, sort of nice report that we can publish, but it's not going to do the job. So, I said, Vladimir, I can't do that yet. We have to build something. And eventually, we have things that are lots of forces that are fighting against us. We all know it, right? And it's leading to this phenomenon that the maps are showing called the splinternet or cyber balkanization. Things are creating little silos. This is also true of science. In science, we create silos all the time because the normal practice of scientific discourse is you find the expert, you talk, you have great ideas, great conversations. We're not used to the idea of standardizing. We don't want to standardize. We want to do something different, right? But when it comes to information flow, we must a little bit. Otherwise, we just can't. It's like agreeing on the language we speak in a meeting. We have to, right? So we have to bridge that culture to some of those other cultures happen. Things are changing geopolitically. China's Digital Silk Road initiative is rewiring it. There will be data trading in Beijing by 2027. They've already started. So large public and private organizations are trading data. That's going to change the world economy, and science will be part of that. China's investing heavily in digital twin technology too for such purposes. Our friends, the surveillance capitalists, the Google, Microsofts of the world, that's why they want you to use their systems, because they can, of course, make money out of the data that flows through that. If you haven't read that, I recommend you do, because we also do this a little bit in science too. We're not innocent here either when it comes to use my system, find my paper, read my stuff. Things have changed. In 2017, there was a large push in the cyber, not just cyber defense, but the cyber strategy of the US. Other nations joined to set new rules for the modern internet. This was back in the halcyon days of 2022. Things have changed. Things have changed, and actually things are changing quite a lot. So we have to think about what we as an ocean community are going to, how we're going to react technologically to let our science still thrive. Of course, if you don't like the game, you have to change the rules. So we said, all right, we have to push back a little bit. So before the UN Ocean Decade started, we wrote an early implementation plan which was adopted by the General Assembly in 2020 and set the course for the decade. The data section of that plan, we put in the language that we built upon and now that we're presenting to you, where we're saying, look, we need to link our data between different independent systems that are run independently with different norms, different cultures, but we have to use the web, now that we all know what it is, to mediate communication across these systems, synchronicity, mirroring, backup, orchestration of services. I'm going back to the original idea from Tim Berners-Lee, the idea of 5-star linked open data. Your data should not live in a PDF. It should not live in an Excel file. You should try to move it up towards this granular little data. So we can take, oh, this data set has that one variable, and it's mapping to another variable in another data set at that granularity, which is what Nico's work has done. So this is not fantasy, this is doable, and we have examples now in this community of how to roll with that. So we said, all right, good, we know the general plan, and then through the early phase, we created what is called an intersessional working group in between the sessions of the IOC Committee on the IODE, the UN process. We convened people and we said, okay, we need to find out where the world is heading in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So we did a lot of consultations with UN agencies, with non-UN intergovernmental agencies, private sector, some navies, some militaries, etc., to figure out what is happening, where is it going to go. The UN Oceans Consortium is quite large, many UN agencies, some of which you would never have heard of before, but there was a lot of insight gathered. And we then published a report in 2021 that has been sort of our mantra as we built ODIS and other systems. How do we fix it? Well, first of all, get your own stuff in order. This is what's happening here. When you discuss, what do we call our variables? What are our methods? What are our standard templates? That is getting your community's house in order. Once you know that, you need a mechanism to push that out to the world so that they hear it. You have now things like Ecological, repositories that can help you do that, the ODIS in the UK and others. So that's there. And then figure out how to actually co-govern so the system you're pushing into can respect what you're saying, understand what you're saying, etc. So to visualize it, your system, so that's our RCN community, you need a nice thick interoperability layer to convert your standards and practices into a generic form that the rest of the world can understand. And that's been the sort of core of the Ocean Decade Data and Information Strategy, which was published a couple of years ago. This is the idea of federation. And federation is when sovereign entities that have their own control over their internal processes, they give up a little bit of their power to a central coordinating entity that they believe can make things better for all of them. If that doesn't, people say federation a lot. If that doesn't happen, it's not a federation, right? So it's very much based on co-governance. It's very much based on actual power sharing. And when that works, people stay in the federation because there's a point to it. So again, the implementation plan was out, the data information strategy was out. Some of that thinking went into a National Academies of Sciences and Royal Society brief that will go towards their policy-making bodies. It takes a while, but we got a meeting in DC on that. And we also worked with indigenous communities to figure out how to join this with the implementation of the CARE principles, what to actually do. Again, those are principles, but we need implementation level advice on what to do this. What's coming up next is about the implementation plan based on the decade strategy. Myself and Kevin O'Brien are co-chairing this, which will actually give you lower level advice. So not principles, but really, please do this and things will be better for us all. That should be out end of this month or in May. If you see me typing away, I'm still working on it frantically to get it in by Friday, right? So we're almost done with that. The main message there is that, everyone wants those flashy, sparkly fountains. They're digital twins, they're data portals, the things that look exciting. But we always neglect the plumbing. We always forget to build robust plumbing systems that we can reuse for many, many purposes. And that's where our attention has been. That has been our mission in ODIS and the Ocean InfoHub, to build this digital commons, to normalize the plumbing between very, very different systems. So that all of the sparkly fountains that pop up and disappear and pop up again, they do so on the same foundation, which reduces costs, maintenance, and allows greater interoperability. So building the plumbing is okay. So that was our mission when we started, to build this sort of inclusive digital ecosystem. That's not a figurative term, it's a technical term we use, to improve discoverability, so findability and interoperability of existing information, and recognizing that we have a pluralistic context that we're working in, right? There's a diverse network of very independent groups who want to do their own thing, and we have to give them a reason to federate. And that's what we did with capacity building. The initial phase was a project, the Ocean InfoHub project, funded by the Government of Flanders, Kingdom of Belgium. And that ran over COVID too, which was difficult, but we did it. And then since then, that project has now crystallized into what is now ODIS, which we'll get to. But very importantly, that funder said, look, make sure that you start in regions that are typically left out. So we started with IOC Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, and small island developing states in the Pacific to build the first prototype of this. Because if it doesn't work globally, if it's the usual sort of European, US, Canada, that sort of avail greatly, it's great, but it's not our mission. So we did that. And as we did that, we got down to serious business pretty quickly. So as Danny said, FAIR is just a set of principles. We can't build a federation on principles alone. We built right away, or as soon as we could, a dashboard that's monitoring who's connected to ODIS. Are they sharing things in a way that all of the other federation partners understand? So IOD's coordinating role is saying, yes, that node is active, that node is producing metadata at this stage, later data, which we understand and the rest of the node understands. So again, it's a concrete monitoring framework to say we're following the FAIR principles in the same way. Therefore, we can build technology. The plumbing is working the same way. If I connect this pipe to that outlet, I know what's going to happen, right? So on that logic, after 2024, OIH as a project closed down. The OIH portal and technology still runs. And we built ODIS underneath OIH. OIH was our sparkly fountain, and ODIS is the plumbing. And that now has become an IODE program component, meaning that is now part of the regular program of IODE, long-term sustained. It's not every day that a project changes the structure of the UN, but we managed to because, again, we kept it simple and it works. It's not lofty claims or fancy demonstrators. It's the basic plumbing, and that's what we need for the future. So that's what's happened, and we have ODIS now as that program component. We have 59 nodes. Some of those nodes represent hundreds of organizations, like some of them are entire continental data systems. Other nodes is a scientist running a blog. That's also fine. If they follow the same metadata, they're an equal partner in ODIS, and that's a digital equity mechanism that we use. So the program component is how IOD coordinates ODIS. The ODIS Federation are all of the organizations that partner to build this thing together. And then ODIS itself is the actual digital ecosystem, the actual machines that are talking to each other. So in a sense, in that intranet, we're creating a sub-network of the internet that is for us, that is for the ocean community, coordinated by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission with the member states having representation. And on that, when we have that flow, data, services, etc., can be orchestrated so that multiple things like information from Goose is coming into ODIS now, OBIS, We're coordinating with WMO for the WIS2 system, the WMO Information Management System. So metadata also can flow back and forth between ODIS and WMO. And we're trying to work with the UN Environment to connect their World Environment Situation Room. But the point is, like, if you want to build portals for EOVs or time series networks, it's much easier now if your data is flowing through ODIS because you can spin up a portal, reusing the technology that other people use to spin up a portal, and filtering out the content that matters for you, while keeping an eye on all of the other stuff flowing through ODIS. You might want to augment your offerings with something you didn't even know was there, like the search engine logic, and then you can boost not just your services, but also your science. So that's the idea. We're harmonizing, we're trying to get it going. For example, for the essential ocean variables, we're working with Goose to define the metadata format that says, look, and as you saw, it's in JSON-LD schema.org that you've already been introduced to. We chose that because tens of millions of machines already know what we're saying. Google dataset search will pick it up, etc. So ODIS defines how to talk about these things, which can also be time series stations, right? We will publish documentation about what that is. And then in that ODIS network, you can build what we are. Well, ODIS is leading the development of a portal on top of that to pick up any assets that are about EOVs, biological EOVs in their case, and then create a portal very, very quickly on top of that. The ocean is not enough. We're coordinating with code data as part of the cross-domain interoperability framework with things like urban health, cultural data, you name it, to make sure that what we're doing in the ocean isn't isolated from other large data federations that are happening out there. How does it work? It's pretty easy. We have a quick startup guide, so like if you have your tech team or you have a few people who want to get started, and I stress scientists who run blogs in some of our regions like IOC Africa, the Latin America, Caribbean, they've done this, right? So this is not, you don't need somebody with a PhD to do this. The guy who built the website for the barbershop down the street should know how to do this, right? That's why it pops up on Google Maps. So here's an example with CMT from Germany. They just registered inside an IODE catalog of sources. They told us where their metadata is. That pointed us, this is a list of JSON-LD files, that when you open them, they contain metadata. Who did it? What did they do? Up to provenance, the stuff we were talking about before in JSON. That gets converted. That is actually a representation of a graph. And we merge this from every one of our ODIS Federation partners into the ocean datascape that we're aware of. So for Vladimir's initial question, we're getting closer to building a state of the ocean data report because we can now see which organizations are producing which data, who's picking it up, who's citing it, who's basing other data sets, to your question earlier. We can now start to track as a whole community, where is my data, who used it, who agrees, who disagrees, etc. And on top of that, the Ocean InfoHub shows us the density and distribution of the data currently registered in ODIS. When Medin joined in the UK, Justin will also pick up a little bit more of this later, that's what happened. They joined, so it's more than 600 organizations in the UK push their data to Medin as a national node. They push it onto us in ODIS. So they don't have to do dual submission. They submit to their local authority, and Medin then pushes it onto us, and we have a huge density of data there for things like digital twinning, you name it. And it's available. As a scientist, I can now go to the map, zoom into an area and say, who's producing any kind of ocean data there? It might be useful for my work. Time series are currently there in little bits and pieces, but if we can organize as a community, something similar will happen with the time series around the world, and that would be fantastic. That's a model that we're pushing for other national oceanographic data centers and their associated data units. And that's what we're using to fight the dark forces that are around us now. That's the metadata layer. And in the last few minutes, that's of course not where we stop. Now that we have an intelligence system, like business intelligence and corporate data fabrics and things, we need to scale it. Now we know who has what. The metadata is great, but now much of it, but not all of it, will point to things like data sets, services, etc. We're going to encourage all ODIS Federation members to point to data sets, but not just data sets, but data sets that are semantically harmonized in things that other Federation partners will understand, using ARCO or analysis-ready cloud-optimized formats like Parquet, ZAR, Web CSV. Some may sound exotic to you, but that's where your data brokers like Bigodimo, etc., can help to make sure things can be converted and pushed on that matter, because it's much, much faster. We have to do the social work side of it too, or the socialization work. So some weeks ago in Colombia, we had the IOC committee, the member state meeting on the IODE. And in that, we presented our progress in ODIS up to this time. The member states were quite happy. We have new terms of reference for both ODIS, our steering committee, and operations group. Every node in ODIS has a right to be represented on the operations group to guide the technical development, right? So their voice is heard and they co-govern. Of course, predictably, the Greeks and the Italians have things to say. But also China, interestingly, because again, as we know, it's quite sometimes it tends to be a bit closed. But now with their data trading and their new digital strategy for the Silk Road, they're very keen to join. So things are changing. And decisions were made at the member state level, including all member state representatives urging all of their ocean data resources inside their countries to link to ODIS. And that will be also part of the implementation plan for the decade, a direct recommendation to do so. So there's no ambiguity now, and we can start engineering rather than, let's say, discussing ad nauseam. Other work is happening in the Atlantic. Since we're in the Atlantic, there is the AORIA. It's built on the various political agreements. And we're putting together a recommendation for the ministerial groups about where to go. And again, what we hope there is that we build a very dense Atlantic sub-network of ODIS that represents Atlantic interests, and we can replicate that across different regions and different communities. It's flexible. This, again, from the implementation plan, will go into the strategy. This is what we're working towards. A data fabric architecture. So as a digital architect, I think about these things quite a lot. A data fabric architecture where data lakes, data warehouses, data spaces, all of that stuff where it's available are well networked to things like data brokers and mediation services like Ecodemo and other who can convert stuff into different formats according to the consumer needs. We set a defined set of products like SDG indicators, EOVs, whatever, but we have specifications. We don't guess, we don't hope. We have specifications to know if you meet them, we can pick them up in the application layer. So that's what we're working towards. And that web you see connecting them all is where ODIS stands right now. It's the continuing active metadata layer that lets people know what's available, who does what, where can I push things, who wants the stuff that I have. And so software, services, etc., can talk to data in a much more mature way. That's in our Vision 2030 approach. Various white papers have been produced as part of the decade. And the goal there is to build interoperating data layers for the ocean. The way that's phrased is very important. It's not that we're building organizations or services. The data is being decoupled from things like the software you use. It should not matter which software you use. Multiple kinds of software should be able to pick that up. The same way we just rely that our software understands CSV, etc. That's the logic. These are some things that we're working on now with the private sector, with the BBNJ, with UNEP. We're trying to do that for marine pollution. We'll have a meeting this summer. We're trying to generalize our EOV approach with biochemistry to other EOV panels. And we'd like to see a marine time series hub somewhere there. That's what I'm here for. And I think we can do it based on your deliberations, based on your outcomes. We can then translate a lot of what you do into specifications, which we will ask you to endorse, and then we release as metadata exchange specifications so things happen quickly, right? We can write papers later. Concluding remarks, I think I've said it all. It's working. It's already interoperable because we didn't build our own standards. We're just stabilizing the use of very well widely adopted standards in the ocean. So it's natively interoperable with others. Our approach is being borrowed or reused by systems like the NASA Heliophysics Lab for space weather. And we're there. So again, we have now a context to think about the FAIR principles in such a way that we can co-implement them and come to a concrete result at the end. So that's it for me.
So the good question about effectively how in quite a complicated worldwide federation, there's starting to be some examples we noticed of effectively conflicting data sets. Effectively, if one person produces a data set, then it can appear in ODIS via several different routes. It can appear in different federates. Sometimes there's a version difference or there's something between the two. I wonder if there was any kind of mechanisms for managing that. It's a bit of a challenge to say, I know my data sets appear two different.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we also have a technical federation, because we amass all of that metadata from all of the ODIS nodes at IODE, and we have a mechanism to cross-check. We're improving it to check for duplication, intentional and unintentional, such that we can inform the nodes that you may have an outdated copy. We've already done this a few times, and some people, when they join, say, wait a second, what's our data doing over there, right? We never endorse that. And so having a collective intelligence system allows us to clean up the ocean internet. We clean it from plastic, we need to clean it up from bad data too, but we can't do that unless we can see it, right? And now we have that mechanism to see it. So we completely expect this. There's no problem with data duplication. Sometimes it's very good that it's duplicated. The same way in Google Scholar, they say this paper is available from these 3 sources. No big deal, right? As long as we know and it's not an abuse of terms and conditions.